Yeah.
Okay, so it is.
Yeah.
I call this meeting to order for the Planning Commission, Wednesday, June 5th, 2024. This is a special meeting. Roll call.
Buck.
Here.
Detmer. Here. McSweeney.
Here.
Meridian.
Here.
Moss.
Here.
Paul.
Yeah.
Robson.
Here. And we expect Rick. All right, so approval of minutes. This is for May 15th regular meeting. Any comments, questions, corrections? Can take a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the May 15, 2024 Planning Commission minutes.
Okay, Ted made the motion. Rich seconded it. All in favor of approval? Aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved unanimously. All right, a little housekeeping. Lisa explained to me these microphones pick up paper rattle. So if you have maps and things to open up, turn off your microphone. It won't, anybody who's using the paper takes over. Okay. Start with older, remember. Okay, so we start with old business, case number 24623. It's on the agenda. It's number 3A for landscape and lighting plan review for Killen's 1150 Bayview Road. And Elaine Kaiser is here and Jeannie Stone. Okay, welcome. Jamie. Okay, thank you. All right. Lisa, do you have anything?
Not outside of, the agenda memo that John provided. Staff has reviewed the submitted plans and have no issues with what's been submitted. It was part of a condition of approval when the site plan was approved originally, that the lighting and landscaping come back to the commission for approval. So that's why they're here.
Okay, Lynn, would you like to say anything?
Yes, good evening. Thank you for having us back to go through the landscape and lighting plans. I hired Neolis Engineering to provide us with the site lighting plans. Those include 5 pole mounted site parking lot lights and 2 that will be wall mounted on the side of the remaining building, the Cortez Flynn building. His drawings also show that we have our site lighting foot candles. That calculation sheet is there, as well as the details showing the height of the pole mounted lights. Everything is dark sky compliant, and so that's a little brief on the lighting. On the landscape plans, we went forth with an idea to be able to have our landscaping be congruent with the existing site, except there was some things that we had to change just a little bit. And it's our intention to have the properties flow from one parcel to the other so it looks unified. We only want to do the landscaping up in front of the property, and so we've shown there with exact count of how many of each species of plant we will be providing. So those drawings went through a couple different revisions and clarification on the plant schedule. So that has been done. We feel it's ready for your review.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Ted?
I just had a couple, just trying to remember back. We have a sheet with a bunch of numbers of items, a summary of items in your review. And I don't remember exactly, but I think you kind of commented like 2.2A and 2.31 were issues with plantings along the north and northeast, I think,
Mhm.
lines. So what was the thought there? You said your client didn't wish to do that.
Yes, when I reviewed this with the client, they said that they did not want to do any additional plantings along the north property line between them and the bike path. There's already some vegetation there, and they also did not want to do anything more between them and the PMP building. Some of that area is used for a future connection that we might have between the two parcels.
Okay.
So they really wanted to just keep going with what they had out front.
So that must have just been a suggestion we had made, it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then there was I got the numbers wrong. 2.3B was an issue of a question about large trees. We do not have any large trees in the landscape plan. Were we asking for them?
Yeah, I have the question here.
Oh,
The question was, large trees planted within 5 feet of paved surfaces pose an increased risk of pavement lifting due to tree root growth. And I was just commenting that we don't have any.
okay, thank
They're
you.
large. Yep.
Albert,
I have the same concern Ted had on my client doesn't want trees at that area. I actually we walk there every day, my wife and I, we walk the pathway. I said, let's walk up there. And I thought, this doesn't look bad, but my other concern is almost just procedural, because in the memo, I asked, like, I got your memo and I had all those items listed, but I didn't have any reference, so I called John and said, John, can you send me the original memo? And I don't have a problem with it. I just think that we should state in the record that we have a reason other than the client's doesn't want to, because if we did that for something else, I'm gonna put in a storage building, I know I can't go over 14 feet, I think, well, I don't want to, I'm gonna go to 15. So, but I think when we do the rationale, and I think when I saw the site and I saw that you have eight sites that you're gonna share with PMP, I think that makes perfect sense not to put trees in between there. But I think for the record, we ought to say that we understand that, but the rationale is to, and you mentioned, to make the site continuous. I just thought that rationale, other than my client doesn't want it, if that makes sense. I don't know how we procedurally do that, but.
Well, if we just could record
Yes.
in the minutes the comments that were made, I
Yes.
think that would do it.
Yeah. Thank you. I understand what you're saying too. Yeah.
Carolyn,
I just was wondering if you could refresh my memory if the east parking was primarily for employees or for patrons or for both?
Employees.
And then the existing headquarter building, is there wall lights on that east side and the south side currently? Cause I feel like, if somebody's going there for security and, path lighting, the north end of the insurance company, like maybe there's enough lighting in that.
There's
area?
pathway lighting on the south side of the main building and at the north end of the Cortez Flynn building.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you.
Albert,
So in the memo that John sent, it said landscape plan. It doesn't say lighting. Are we approving both of those tonight?
yes,
Okay, then, and maybe somebody's already done this, but there are 4 standards or performance requirements for section 1711, exterior lighting. Is it okay if I read those off? Or I have them too, I think, but one is outdoor lighting in all use districts are used to light the general areas of a specific site shall be shielded to reduce glare and be arranged so as to reflect lights away from adjacent residential districts. Residences, from what I see and from they're all down lighting, I think we meet that standard, but I think we should say that we've seen this. I didn't see the review unless you've already done that, Lisa. Or the-
Staff has done a review and.
For those 4,
Yes,
okay, that's all. I didn't have a memo or anything that said, so those 4 items in 1711, staff is happy with those.
yes, staff has
That's all I
gone through
need,
both.
that's all I need to know. Thank you.
anybody else have questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you, Eileen, and we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Matt, do you have anything?
I mean, it looks good.
Okay,
Yeah, I think it looks good as well.
all right, should we put forward a motion?
Yeah, I would be happy to make a motion, to approve the final landscaping and lighting plans for the Kilwins, parking lot. I don't know if I have some parcel ID numbers. I don't know if I need those in my motion or not.
I can include them if you wanna, if you don't wanna read them out loud.
Okay.
I can identify those parcels.
Just so we're clear with it. So that would be the motion for the parcels we've looked at here to approve the final landscaping and lighting plans.
I'll second.
Okay, Ted made the motion and Matt seconds. Any more discussion? Roll call,
Public comment.
say it again.
Do any public comment?
Is there any public
I
comment?
just.
You're right,
procedural
you're right.
process.
Is there any public comment before we vote? There isn't anybody online?
No, there's not.
Okay. All right, now roll call.
Robson,
Yes.
Buck,
Yes.
Detmer. Yes. McSweeney,
Yes.
Meridian,
Yes.
Moss,
Yes.
Paul.
Yes.
You're approved.
Thank you all so much.
Yep. All right. Moving on to old business number 3B, review and discussion of Article 5, temporary signs concerning content neutral compliance. We had a lot of communication before this meeting, so I kind of wanted to just review. The first was Charlie's memo. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Okay,
It's a little unfair if you're saying you go ahead with it without him, or if you wanted to late for some reason, I wasn't real clear about that.
I was just thinking, your light was green. It's not up on my side, sorry.
but he couldn't be here. We proceed with business based on who's here, and we don't save things for people
No,
later.
I didn't mean to suggest that.
Okay,
I just, he had made some, you putting it out there about, are we gonna deal with it now, or
mhm,
so?
okay, well, we are dealing with it, so I don't think the questions he had are that we need to answer tonight. But I just wanted to make sure everybody had seen it and if they had any comments or questions. Albert?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear in this very second to last paragraph, where it says, thank you for the consideration of these issues. I am confident that your discussions tonight will be thoughtful and productive and supports our consensus decision. So I don't think there's any.
Okay, so moving on. Ted had communication with Charlie and Lisa. So I just kind of summarized his things. He was concerned about the last minute agenda item of our last meeting. That enough material was not available. There was no agenda memo. And his final point was we need adequate notice, background material, and good process. I agree with him on that. Did the commission want to discuss any of that? Actually, I think I'll let you say whatever you like.
Yeah, my only point was, when I saw Commissioner Wilmot's letter, I was not opposed to taking up this issue at all or discussing it. Anytime we take up business, it's very important to me personally, that the public, the commission is as informed as possible. And I know things come up where we want to expedite or move on things, but as much as possible, I want to have a packet with information and stuff. So that was my issue, not wanting to deal, let's forget about signs. It's the law passed 9 years ago, who cares? That was not my position. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments?
I just wanna. Just to get my view out there is I couldn't agree more with Commissioners Paul's comments that I actually have some concerns with the fact that this was a later minute agenda item add. We're now having a special meeting. And some of the potential signs that are impacted coming into a election year, given the fact that we've had a court case that's been standing now for approximately 9 years. It seems like there have been ample time to address this issue during a non-election year. And not only are we doing an election year, we're doing it midway through the year. And so I don't have concerns about discussing the issue. But I would have concerns about taking action on the issue, given the fact that we are in election year and we are approaching an election.
Well, I think that I would like us to continue the discussion. We've started it. If the time frame doesn't allow us to deal with it before the election, so be it. But I don't think I want to derail it at this point. We're partway into it. Albert?
So I have some questions on the issue, on the sign.
All right, so are we done talking about memos?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, there's just one more memo and then we'll get to your. Okay, Amy Tweeten feedback, that was in our agenda packet. She recommended B2A and B2 and B2A changes of the sign. Ordinance appear to be fine. She suggested residential, multi-residential lots are bigger, so she wondered if there should be allowed more signs and more sign area. And she wondered how, if you don't require permits, how do you track 60 days in a 30-day gap? So in terms of discussion, what I would like to focus on is the number allowed, the size, which pertains to maximum size per sign, maximum height per sign, and total sign area per lot, and then enforceability. That's how I see the discussion going. So Albert?
I just have some questions because I haven't been in on all the sign discussions, but to me, there's 3 or 4 major changes, and one has to do with in the residential districts and RM districts, not allowing wall signs or window signs. I just don't know what the rationale was. I don't have an issue either way at this point. I just want to be informed. I know this is a subcommittee, but do we have some kind of maybe summary of what their thoughts were? So why did this was allowed before? Wall signs and window signs were allowed in residential. If we look at the multicolored
Comparison.
with multicolored comparison, it looks to me like they were allowed, and then in new they're not allowed. So I just wonder what the rationale for that was. Is I don't know if we know.
Well, in residential, we try very hard to make residential. So if somebody has a small business, they're allowed isn't it a 1 foot by 1 foot sign that they can put on a wall? So we don't want a lot of signage in residential areas.
I mean, I'm gonna argue that I think I would rather have a, 6 square foot wall sign over a freestanding sign in someone's yard for residential. But I really feel like in both of the residential groups that we have here, they should be allowed the same things for freestanding wall and window. In the RM2 district, there are a lot of single family residences that should be allowed to have equal to what the other residential districts have. And personally, I feel that windows should be allowed in all of the residential. Maybe we need to define it as 75% of one street facing window. And then, you know, make the number of freestanding signs 3 instead of 6. And then for the wall, I think we need a definition for what a wall is. We don't have that in our zoning ordinance. So for example, a wall refers to the solid vertical wall surface of a principal building. And wall signs, a wall is not defined as roofs, sloped or flat, roof parapets, roof dormers, porches, accessory buildings, and fences. We need to define like what is a wall. Ted?
Just have a few comments. I again generally tend to lean away from excessive signage. I'm trying to think of, it was an interesting point Commissioner Moss brought up. I was looking through this and trying to think on the fly here, but I think they were allowed before by accident. They weren't excluded from what I can see. I wasn't on the committee, but as I look at this now, when you start to make these categories, then it's clearly more apparent that they were allowed, but was that the intent? They aren't specifically allowed, they're just not allowed. So there's lots of things like that in there. I'm trying to think, walking around town where I've seen signs in people's windows and people putting signs on the wall of their house. And I'm trying to think if I really want to see that. I'm going to take a little different angle. I'd rather see a sign in the yard rather than on their house. It changes the look of the neighborhood to me a bit, but how are they gonna,
Well, how do they attach a temporary wall sign to the house? What,
nail it on or staple it? I don't
Yeah.
know.
and
I feel like in residential, it should be by right, like you should be able to put it anywhere. As long as we're limiting the size and the number of, it's either on your house or in your window or in your front yard.
Albert?
Again, in the strict residential districts, I don't have a problem with what's up there, R1, R2, R3. I think it's another consideration of an RM1 and RM2, because this whole lawsuit came through on First Amendment rights. If you live in the Hayner Apartments, let's say, you may not be able to put a sign in the yard, because either that or we're gonna have 24 different signs with conflicting views. But if you do feel like you need to get your view out there, allowing a window sign in an apartment building, how else are we taking rights away for people to display their views and in those RM1 and RM2? Okay, these are just questions I have. I'm not trying to be critical. I'm trying to understand the process and you know, I guess it'd be nice to have a report again, as I said, when we have these subcommittees.
Right,
What was the rationale? Then it would be easier for me to understand.
Ted?
I just want to make a comment, and as I thought about this, coming into this, I hope we don't spend a lot of time. We have a very specific law, it's 9 years ago. Signs have to be content neutral. The more each of us, because we all have different experiences and brains and thoughts, the more we each try and decide what may or may not be legal in the future, should someone make a challenge and it's taken to the Supreme Court. I don't think we're going to get very far with that kind of thing. I think we have to just comply with the law, the content law, and then make the best sign ordinance we can for temporary signs. I think too much speculation. I mean, if we hit a wall and we need an attorney opinion, but a speculative opinion on what could happen in the future, boy, I just don't know that we should spend a bunch of time on that. We should try and make a good ordinance we think complies with the content neutral aspect.
Carolyn?
I agree with that, but I think everybody needs to have the ability to showcase a sign if they want to. And if it's in their window or on a wall or in their front yard, And I also think we need to think about, we have 4 seasons here. And it's, who's gonna stick a sign in their front yard in the middle of a blizzard that they could stick in their window?
I'd like to say, I feel like there's a need for additional educational from a legal or at a minimum of best practice. And I can, in consideration of Commissioner Paul's comments, I don't want to nitpick, but there's some things that I think about in terms of, are we treating, does the current ordinance that we're proposing here treat temporary signs equally? And I think that gets to the heart of the Supreme Court case. And so I want to throw out there a situation of, what if we were to have a religious organization in a RM district and a religious organization in a business district, both with a directional sign? Does the organization, the business district, allow for a greater sign area as it's currently written? And then are we either discriminating or favoring one potentially religious organization over the other versus treating all equally? So I would maybe suggest that I think we may be off base by looking at by district types versus looking at the use of the sign in terms of a temporary non-commercial sign, which would kind of fall across all districts. So that's one thing I want to throw out there. The other thing is, in doing research here, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that there has been another Supreme Court after Reed, the city of Austin, where the response, where one of the the rationale was noted to say, it's not so much that if you can read it, it makes it content and therefore infringement potentially upon a First Right Amendment. It's, are you treating all signs equally? And they said, for example, a community could restrict all signs regardless. It's not so much that you have to be able to read the sign as if you're treating all the signs the same. And then I also saw, and again, these are just examples to me that they raise more questions than what I have answers for. The city of Wyoming and Michigan went to the state appeals court. They had too restrictive of an ordinance because they limit the number of signs, temporary signs you could have to 60 days in a calendar year. And they said that was too restricted. There was another community that was out west that said you were only allowed one sign per issue on your property. And the federal district court ruled that was too restrictive. And so it brings into question, can we even limit the timeframes? Can we limit the number of signs? And I'm sure there's some degree of reasonableness, but I don't really feel prepared that I know enough at this point. And those are just a handful of issues that I, on my own was able to research regarding temporary signs.
I will tell you that Austin case was about off-premise signs regulation. And what they concluded was that you can regulate commercial versus non-commercial. And that if something is off-premise, you don't have to read the sign to know it's off-premise. You just look at the premises. So these court cases are complicated, but Matt.
Yeah, I have two questions. Going from the current R1, R2, R3, and RM1, RM2, as far as the window and wall, what was the rationale moving to not allowing them in those districts?
It's clutter. Aesthetically, it's not pleasing to have a window covered up. It's not pleasing to have something tacked on the wall of your house. You still can express yourself with a temporary sign, and they end up being put in the yard.
My next question was, and I know you referenced the Ann Arbor temporary sign. Um. Ordinance. Is that consistent with other municipalities? Is that what you were saying? As far as not allowing window and wall. In residential, in mixed residential,
Well, let's see.
and I'm just curious if that was something you.
They just, single and two family multiplexes allowed a wall sign, maximum is 3 square feet per principal building. You're allowed 2, and the maximum height has to be 10 feet. And then in multiple family, freestanding signs. And wall signs are allowed, and the other group housing would be maximum 12 feet per principal building, 12 square feet, 10 feet. So depending on the area, you can, time, location, place, you can also regulate number.
Thank you.
Ted?
Obviously, I do find this, fairly complicated as far as things we look into, in technical. My biggest, one of my concerns, on this, it's funny because I read Commissioner Wilmot's, the question of urgency. In one statement specifically, I've been concerned about the periodic proliferation of unsightly and distracting temporary signs in otherwise beautiful residential neighborhoods. I consider them to be nuisance and blight. I generally like to think there should be limits on signs for aesthetics and basically agree with that statement. So it's interesting when I looked at, and again, we're just starting this discussion, but when I look at the proposal, as Amy Tweeten had mentioned too, this is a significant increase in the amount of temporary signage allowed. One sign is allowed up in this proposal all the time, all year. It's not even a temporary sign by our definition of our ordinance, which is a sign intended to be displayed for a limited period of time. So one's allowed all the time. Previously, there was basically 2 signs allowed. Now it goes up to 6. Previously, it was 17 days in a 2-month period, and it goes to 60 days. It was 17 days in a 4-month period. It goes to 60 days in a 3-month period. That would be a 500%, 5 times increase. So the 2 to 6, so I'm seeing massive increase in signage, and I'm somewhat concerned about that, although I'm sensitive, especially to elections, and people want to participate in that for sure. Traverse City's approach is interesting. I believe I pulled that. Temporary signs are intended to be associated with an event and need to be taken down 14 days after. That's about what they have. They were, again, this is why it's going to be difficult. If we start trying to debate is that illegal or not, I don't know how far we're going to get. I think anything we ultimately want to propose, we need to run by the city attorney.
Definitely.
But other than that, for us, boy, it's going to be a tough discussion. Grand Blanc Township had an interesting approach, and I had thought of this on my own. It was interesting to see it. They had taken an approach that they had a general sign ordinance, but within 60 days of a sanctioned election, where there was at least one issue on the ballot, it would be either a proposal or a vote for office. They allowed more signs in those periods, 60 days before any kind of election, basically, that we would have formal election. So they took an approach, and they stated that they wanted to give more allowance for freedom of speech during those times because they thought it was important. So they had a 2-tiered approach, and I thought that's interesting. That's kind of like how I feel. Like, I don't want, personally, I think aesthetically, 6 yard signs 2/3 of the year in someone's yard is kind of a lot. Yet, I know there's some people who, when we get to election season, have multiple signs. And it doesn't bother me so much. I mean, it's a shorter period of time and so anyway, I just wanted to state that.
Okay. Carolyn,
I would just ask, Charlie, like, where are these houses in these neighborhoods that he's seen with all these signs? Cause I haven't seen them.
they do exist,
There's-
and they exist all through the city. And
Are there?
in
specific-
entranceways to downtown. And
I guess I haven't noticed. them.
sometimes the content is not friendly and it has gotten a lot of residents upset, so that's one reason why we want to deal with it. But we have to do it in a way that's legal. I will tell you that I discovered a book available online. I forget what was it called? Michigan sign guidebook. So we have ordered that. Hopefully I'll be able to get it tomorrow. So I think that hopefully will guide us in terms of, what we can consider and, the safer path through all of this. So, go ahead, Ted.
And again, the tail end of what Commissioner Buck said, again, it would be, obviously, as we try and wade through this. Unfortunately, our city planner, John Icoangeli, wasn't able to come tonight, but his experience would be helpful too. We need, I feel like I need direction and education too in this matter. It's not an easy one. It's not an intuitive thing for me, like what I think it should be. Like I kind of want to know what other municipalities have done, hear experiences, hear some more legal discussion, get some direction that way, so.
And I also like trying to look at the Traverse City ordinance. It was quite different than ours in a lot of ways, many ways. I like the idea that it was, temporary sign tied to events have to be removed within that 14 days. And then there was some language around right away, which I think would be important to look at as well.
Albert?
Besides so the big change was in that residential, not allowing the window and wall signs. And then when we look at all the business zones, the OS zone, the I1 and I2, we've made those all the same, which makes sense. It goes back to Commissioner Buck's idea that they're all the same, then we can't be saying we're letting something happen here that isn't happening here. But once again, the big change was in that middle zone where we went from the B3, this is what, 1, 2, 3, the fourth comparison down, where B3A and I2, etc. They had 100 square feet per lot. That drops to 64. They had 100 square feet for wall, and that drops to 32. Now, that makes everything consistent, that's fine. But again, I'd like to know, you're on the sign committee, Cynthia? Just kind of, what was the discussion about dropping it that much? Again, I don't have a yet even opinion, I just want to understand what happened at the committee. And I guess we shouldn't be doing committee work here, but at the same time, I need the education.
Yes, I don't know where the 100 feet came from.
Okay.
It probably was just like everything else. It's like that was the
Okay.
status quo, signs always. Clients always want, or applicants always want bigger signs than, no matter what you allow, it's never big enough. And I think that it just intuitively 100 feet goes without saying it's not necessary. When you do try to figure out what's an appropriate size, you have to factor in the speed of cars going by, who needs to see it, and how fast they're going to see it. And then you get calculations of how big the type has to be, and that's all, that's done, that's a national or a federal
And B3 is right along the highway, in fact, right where we
Right.
just discussed in the
mhm.
previous issue, okay, that.
But I would have to say the 100 feet. Got picked out of the air in the sixties. When was the sign ordinance done? Cause that came later.
Let me look.
Well, it says adopted 3/8/2004. So,
That was
Uh,
probably an amendment.
But it could have been revised.
That was probably a revised amendment
Yeah.
in 2004.
well, it was amended on 5/7/2018.
That would have been the most recent, yeah.
I do think some things are just, it just seemed like the right number at the right time. But I think that, if you look at, and John knows about the federal, math that you do. That we could calculate that based on our areas and then decide how big do the letters have to be? How big does it have to be to put enough letters on something? And actually determine the size based on that. But I do think 32 square feet is plenty big for this area. Ted?
So I guess, trying to listen and learn from everyone else and ask the chair and everyone. So it seems to me that going through this discussion is a little bit complex. I mean, some people want some more information. We have a grid before us, but clearly it's been brought up that there are other ways of doing it. Traverse City was brought up entirely different, simplified, but different, not saying better. Issues of, could we do something during, before elections, I brought up. So just as we proceed, are we stuck with this grid? Do we get to have some discussion about other options and then decide if it is this grid, we'll just work on this grid, play with the numbers, or should we entertain a few other thoughts? Do we need a little more opinion from John Nicolangeli and or legal opinion and or education? So I'm just a little confused. I want to proceed. I just don't know how to do it well.
Right. Carolyn?
We could also look at what permits the city has now that are out there for temporary signs. Because some of them require a permit, like the freestanding signs in the business. So what's an example, like, do we even need freestanding signs in these business districts? Or is it more wall and window signs?
I can say that window signs are not regulated by permit. Wall signs and freestanding signs would be, so those can be looked at and try and get a summation of what
What's out there?
what that need has been over
Yeah,
maybe some
I
time.
think that would be helpful.
There have been a few freestanding signs I know in the business district. Maybe it's a lot that had a little space on it on the edge of downtown. I've seen a few of those.
Mhm.
And then also violations for these temporary sign permits. Have there been any? Like in the residential, you need a permit to have a freestanding and a wall sign. So have these residential,
To the best of my knowledge, residential has not been regulated, at least since 2004. Being, there were just so many and one person doing that job.
gotcha.
So that was kind of one of those things that was never really regulated.
So one of the issues came up was in discussion or thought, I think for people is, the requiring of a permit, yes or no, which some cities do and some don't, and some do for some of them and not for all of them, like we kind of do. If we do permits, as far as the fee aspect, that is up to the discretion of the city, obviously, right? You could have a permit without a fee just for the sake of discussion if you wanted to.
City council approves the rates and charges if there
Right.
are any.
So they could do
So if
that.
there was a fee, they would.
I had another idea too, as we got to the issue of compliance and monitoring. Short of a application form, I'm thinking, because having done it, of putting out 200 signs in the city. And filling out a form for each sign where it went and potentially paying a fee if you were a candidate. How that would work, it didn't seem like it would work real well, but But short of that or nothing, I wondered about an alternate approach to consider, which was, I guess I'm gonna call it a registration. Where we pass as part of our ordinance that you have to register your sign. What would that mean? You would go down to City Hall, you would write on the pad or the ledger what you were doing, where it was minimal information, maybe the property and then you would get a sticker, which you would put on. You would write the date you went to do that, and the date would be, you could even write the date on, and they would know because you signed the book. So there would be some way that we could, without massively involving city staff, fees, forms, there would be a shorthand way, I think, of kind of trying to get some compliance with some ability to monitor the situation. I just wondered about that, if that's.
There was discussion about the possibility of having people come in and the city would issue them stickers. The problem with that is, if you look at especially an election year where you have a lot of signs out there, one, are people going to do it? Two, if they do it, making sure that those stickers do get on those signs, if we give them
Right.
however many, I mean, it is additional staff time.
So what I'm thinking of, you usually, like most things, maybe smaller things in a complaint driven system. So if there's a particular issue, a neighbor's unhappy with another neighbor's, sometimes what happens. You would quickly get to the point where if the sign didn't have a sticker, then that could be brought into compliance between city staff and someone. They could figure out roughly when it was or put some date on. So you could, moving forward, at least have some way to deal with it.
The problem with that is you would literally have to go door to door. We can't go on people's property and put stickers on their signs. They
Right,
have,
no, you take them down.
we can't remove signs from public property
From private property.
or private property, sorry, only public right of way. We can't remove
So
signs.
who removes them when it's not compliant?
Right now in commercial,
No, residential, because we're talking
no,
about. past
they haven't
stuff.
been regulated at all. In residential districts.
But you clearly can, because people, we know under pass a sign ordinance with a size, if. Someone put in one twice as big as we allow, and we said, well, we can't do anything, it's on private property, why would we even waste our time?
The property owner would be notified that it's a violation, it needs to be removed.
Or what?
It would be, they would be subject to a civil infraction.
Okay, so there is a way to.
That would be code enforcement.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Matt?
That's
No,
all
that-
that.
That was my question. Is it enforceable?
Yeah.
Like, are we able to enforce these display codes? And that was my question.
The greater the number of the signs, the harder that would be.
You'll be able to enforce the number and the size and the total square footage. The one that is really difficult to do is when did they put it in, to start the 60 days? Does the start of 60 days count when there's a complaint? So that we really struggled with how we would establish that. Ted?
And again, it was interesting, Traverse City had no days, they said temporary signs should be event driven. And put them up ahead of the event and take them down within, whatever they said, 10 days or 14 days, whatever they did. So they didn't have that issue of how many days.
Albert?
It seems there's a lot of things, I think, in the city that are basically handled on a nuisance issue. And I think that's how this would be handled, if until somebody complains, it's not an issue, and then when they complain, then it's dealt with. Rather than stickers and we're always short on staff trying to get more important things done. And I think if you just think of enforcement as we do with many other things, if it's a nuisance, then we deal with it.
My point about the stickers, then you could sticker it and that would end the discussion when it went up. And then. Both the person who has the sign and the person who's complaining, right on it, it says, so then. We don't have to fight about that.
So maybe every
Sure.
citizen needs a roll of stickers and a Sharpie.
No, because then they could change all their information whenever they wanted.
No, to do it correctly, you would need a logbook. They would have to come and pick them up and sign in.
I think what Ted's imagining will work for candidates. Particularly local candidates. I think that the Republican and Democratic Party would all comply, and any signs they sold that were gonna go into the city. They could you know, if it somehow we figured out how those stickers get there, if you ask each individual to have to go to the city to get
Yeah.
stickers, that's just not gonna work.
No.
I agree.
So, I don't know what the answer is, but. For political signs, it would work, but I think it's interesting. I don't know if you can. You can't call it an event. Because you have to look at the sign to see if it's an event or not. So I don't know how,
I'm just telling.
was that was Traverse City that did that?
Yep,
So I'd like to look into that and then get, you know, a lawyer opinion of that. Now, this new guideline, sign ordinance guideline, I'll look through that tomorrow and hopefully that has a chapter specifically for how you update that. And you know, that might really help in terms of doing the right thing. So I guess my impression is we're not ready to make any decisions. And that we'll get that sign ordinance guidebook. I will look into the Traverse City one and look for some other smaller communities. Yes.
Yeah, no, I would just say like referencing Charlie's memo, we can walk and chew gum.
Mhm.
Right, I mean, we can just keep looking at this, working on it. But like other people said here, it just, you know, it's not that it's not important, but. You know,
Mhm.
if it gets done before the election, great, if it's after, great, we just need to keep working on it and get an ordinance that works for us. From Petoskey.
right. And like, I'm like a non-clutter guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't wanna just arbitrarily make some decision that kind of limits what people want to do within reason either. I don't want to do that.
Right, the 6 is just. I would consider a maximum of what you could do. We currently have 2 is not enough. I think in an election year, 6 probably, because you can do front and back differently. That allows you 12 candidates and issues combined. Rich,
Then I noticed that you increased the square footage to 20 from 12,
right,
so that's 6.
well, if you were going to have 6 signs, you would have to have that square footage.
Oh, that would be the total.
So if we change the maximum number of signs, that would also. We'd be adjusting the total square footage.
Okay, I didn't realize that was per lot.
It had occurred to me also, people do this and other things in life, but you could have let's, for the sake of our, less than 6, there could be a person supporting 8 or 10 candidates, let's say. And they would have the ability within whatever number we pick to change signs.
Mhm.
I would argue that most people follow the patterns of walking, driving to work, places they go. Multiple times in their life, they do the same pattern. So who drives by your house is pretty much consistent to some degree, unless you're on a highway, I suppose, but people can alternate signs too. So you can get a little creative with that. You could have 10 signs and you could support 10 candidates, but whatever the city's limit was, you would alternate them. I think that's not the end of the world.
Albert?
Just a couple of technical things and then I'll try to be quiet. A couple of technical things and I'll try to be quiet. The other change was, before we had for window signs, 75% of window area. And then we added for almost every district, I think, that has that allowed, a additional restriction of 32 square feet per lot, which wasn't there previously. Again, what was the rationale there was one, and again, maybe these are the questions maybe what we need to do is form a set of questions for the sign committee that will be helpful. And I just try to do some math, 32 square feet is 75%. Let's set the other one, I'm sorry, 75% of 32 square feet is 75% of about 42. And so And then you only have a 5-foot sign, and so it does fairly limit, which is fine, but I'm thinking. Think of the difference between, what's the store with all the, there's been Cutler's, think of Cutler's windows. And then think of the windows, on one of the small shops on, the flower shop, say on, Michigan Street. You know, it is, are we, again, I'm just for information, I haven't have any, I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just trying to understand.
Right, for,
But the, so 32 square feet is an additional limitation, you know, that, and if you're, can only have 2, that's 16 square feet per sign. So that was, again, I want to understand that one.
right, can I answer that?
Yeah,
With windows in particular, for good retail, you want to be able to see into a business, you don't want windows blocked. So that's why we allow 75%, but only up to 17 days. Wait a minute, here we go. Where is it? Window, up to 15 days in a 90-day period. They aren't asked for very often, correct?
They don't require a permit, so I don't
okay.
then hear if anything
Right,
is
so
more of
it's-
an enforcement matter.
I have to keep reminding myself, temporary, we are talking about temporary signs. There's many signs and they all have different reasons and different businesses have different needs. So yeah, you're juggling to try to make everybody happy. So the main thing is to try to limit blocking windows. So you allow 75%, but if you have a really large window, do we really want 75% of that covered? So it's kind of like the tolerance level. 32 feet, you should be able to say what you want to say. And you know, so it doesn't need to be bigger than that.
now what I would say, I guess what I'm asking is, do you really need the 32 square feet? Because will the 75% take care of it by
There
itself?
is a portion of the ordinance, I'm trying to find it, that actually says that window area it's not a singular window.
Right.
It's all of the windows. So if you get a storefront that has a very large frontage, 75% of that is
Right.
huge.
Pretty big, yeah.
Mhm. And I think that was the thought of the sign committee, was that in those instances,
Right.
that would be a bigger factor.
Unfair advantage for one and unfair disadvantage for the other. Yeah.
Doug, you had something you wanted to say?
Thank you. I just want to, again, I wanted to use that term that I said, temporary non-commercial signs, that I do think we have the ability to distinguish between commercial and non-commercial. And I would like us to see us on temporary non-commercial signs, treating those equally across all districts, where here we're separating it by the district type. And that's my initial thought, and with some education, maybe I would change that thought, but it seems like that would be a fair treatment of a large category of signs. It may also allow us to kind of narrow the discussions that, you know, in theory, you could kind of defer or tackle these issues separately. You could tackle the commercial signs, such as, you know, window placements, going out of business, you know, sales, on a different discussion. And then you could tackle the temporary non-commercial signs on another topic.
So temporary non-commercial, R1, R2, R3, RM1, RM2 is the group temporary.
No, I think it would apply for in this, like, so this would be perhaps a directional sign for a you know, I'm thinking maybe it's a business, it's a community organization. You know, a church may say, come to service on, you know, on a particular day. But I would think now those type of signs are regulated the same way as a political message, for example.
They have to be.
Right?
Just to clarify, directional signs, we do currently have those in our ordinance, and those are ones that are allowed in the public right of way.
Okay.
Just so you know,
Okay.
so that is a different animal
Yeah,
from this
okay.
one. These are on premise. The one thing to think about is when you're looking at treating them or creating them all equal, you're now either shrinking what businesses are allowed to have, or you're making residential that much bigger. And the bigger issue at least from my experience over the years, is making those residential signs that much bigger, and then when you allow 6 of them, that becomes. So just food for thought, as far as, not saying that can't be done, that's absolutely something that could be, you just have to, there's that give and take, so if you're gonna give more to the businesses, you're, giving more to the residential, but if you're gonna take away to prevent those big signs in the residential, you're gonna take away from those businesses. So that's just something to think about.
Albert?
And the last question that was asked last time, and again, these probably be one of the questions we asked the sign committee. I have the sign here, my economics teacher always uses widgets to talk about something, so you didn't have any. So y'all can read widgets. Cause I have it facing this way, either as a wall or a window sign. And I have this many square feet, how many ever square feet that is. Now, if you, Doug can see widgets and so can Lisa. Is this twice as many square feet? That was asked last time. I think that's one of the questions we have to have the sign committee on double side signs. Is it one side that counts or the other one counts? And I think maybe that's how we proceed from here is are there certain questions we know right now that we want clarification on from the sign committee? Because that would give us some way to go other than discussing.
If I could, the sign committee is 2 people of this body, can only make suggestions to help us facilitate discussion. So I'm sure the people on it would be concerned about spending hours and hours. They need to be, I'm just wondering as we discuss this, if we're gonna have to do a little bit more here, either work session or us, because the last thing 2 people want to do is really agree and then get here and we disagree with everything, so they're helpful, but I don't know what you're gonna want to tackle versus saying where does everyone want to go? I don't know.
And if I could just, by now you guys probably know this is my own soapbox that I do struggle with the ideal of the subcommittee, the concept of the subcommittees. If the subcommittees are wordsmithing at the direction of the full board, that makes a lot of sense to me. But when the subcommittees are responsible for the primary, education, learning, and then perhaps even suggesting recommendations prior to any type of advisement from the board, to me, it seems like we're doing that backwards of how it should be. And so I would like to see an issue such as this in front of the full board versus a subcommittee.
Okay. Carolyn?
I just wanted to say maybe, when we're talking about the different sign types across the districts, we should be looking at the idea of you don't get all 3 sign types in one time period. You're limited, like, okay, you can choose freestanding, or you can choose wall, or you can choose window, but you don't get all 3 at one time.
It's interesting.
Something to think about.
I don't know how that would. Pick one.
Well, it's kind of a square footage issue.
Right.
So you're saying there should be a total. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be, the way it's set up now, which is typical sign setup, is this particular sign gets this square footage, this particular sign gets this square footage. Then you would have to come up with a number that said total square footage for the property. Which is really, I don't know about that calculation. Matt?
And then maybe, having all signage, temporary signage be event based or separating it from event based and non-event based.
Well, you have to, the rule is, or the test is. If you describe the sign, so you said event or non-event, what do I have to do to determine which it is? You have to read it. Well, that's not content neutral.
Well, and I guess I just don't know how other municipalities have ordinances around event based signage. So I don't know then. If that's not something you can.
As far as I can tell, you can treat commercial and non-commercial, it's real dicey, you can and you can't.
Okay.
So it's real confusing what the lines are. at least for me. Like I said, I hope that sign ordinance thing explains things in a way that it'll be obvious what we need to do about it. Ted,
The MSU extension on planning often has
that's where,
a lot of, that's where the sign guide.
yeah, in fact, I found it, you know, you Google and then you see what comes up. And I Googled it and that came up. Well, then I discovered one of the first things I printed out was a Supreme Court ruling from MSU Extension Service. And lo and behold, it's on the, it's recommended as to see it. So I saw this after I discovered that, and that hopefully I'll be getting tomorrow.
I also noticed that there was a international sign association that had a handbook on temporary signs.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not sure.
This
it's all
is specifically
duplicate
for Michigan, which is probably how we want to focus versus international,
Well, okay,
you know,
I understand that, but I guess, it is the US Supreme Court, so I think this was
Right.
intended for the United States.
mhm.
Would that be a group that's concerned about sign compliance, or a group that's generally works with people trying to advance signage for their causes? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe if I could rephrase that, I think there are, to my point about additional education, I think there's lots of resources out there and several potential handbooks that are made for municipalities, and it just speaks to the point that this court case was settled 9 years ago, and so we're not the first community that has faced this, and I'm sure there's
Right.
best practices to navigate through it.
To speak to that, this handbook that Cynthia is referencing, I did speak to Brad Newman with MSU, and that is their recommendation,
Mhm,
is that is the guidebook that municipalities use. He said that is the one that,
MSU extension.
mhm. So they didn't.
it's
produce
actually
it.
Scenic Michigan,
Okay.
but that is who they recommend.
I had thought of getting that before it was fairly expensive, I think. So no one's really had that in our city, that guidebook.
I think it was something that was used in a course that we took, but it was online and it was
S- s-
kind of,
So we haven't had that in our possession.
no. We will. Tomorrow, hopefully.
Mhm. Carol,
I just wanted to mention that, in section 6.1, the permitted permanent signs, flag poles are permitted and you get up to 3 per lot. But we don't have anything that refers to wall mounted flags. So. Moving forward, you
Well,
know,
we
is that
do.
a
We do.
temporary?
they have to be 5 feet above.
But it's
For
not defined
clearance.
in the,
That's clearance under, that's in the,
there's flagpole height defined, but nothing about a wall mounted flag.
there is reference to that in the ordinance. There is a clearance, a minimum. Let me look here. There's
Yeah,
actually a diagram in there as well.
And that's permitted,
yes.
permanent.
Mhm.
Flags kind of go under the freedom of speech, so.
We don't have, like in residential, we don't have any flag rules, do we?
There are not, other than
Yeah.
how many they can have on a property, and I believe it's one per, if it's up to 100 feet in width, you can have one, no more than 3, but it does kind of give that breakdown.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Let's see here. Flagpole shall not exceed 30 feet. Parcels having fewer than 100 primary street frontage feet shall be permitted 1 permanent flagpole, and parcels having more than 100 feet of primary street frontage shall be permitted 1 flagpole per each 100 feet of primary street frontage, not to exceed a maximum of 3 flagpoles.
So can you hang flags not on a flagpole, like on your,
Yeah, like
Or
it's
it's-
just a wall mounted.
A wall mounted one, yes, and there is, I'm looking to see if I can find it in here, and I don't know that it specifies district. I think it's what it identifies as more for the downtown area, simply for pedestrian passage in the public right of way. Of course, I didn't bring my book with me, so I'm
I have mine.
trying to find.
I'm trying to get. What is the city hall guest password?
Say it again, Carolyn.
Oh, gosh, I have no idea. Sorry,
That's all right.
I'm just always logged in.
I just want to make sure we're covering.
There is
lights
something in
and
here, but
walls of houses, businesses. Or wall mounted.
Have you had issues with flags?
Not in our community, I haven't seen any, but I've seen them in surrounding communities. Just flags hanging on walls.
As opposed to not on a pole.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we don't allow things to be off the, the porch deck. I'm trying to think what that's called,
Overhang.
Yeah, yeah, like you can't have it on a fence, you can't have it across your
Like the
porch.
horizontal beam
Yeah,
on the top.
not on the top. but-
so it talks about minimum
Like
vertical
gates.
clearance of 80 inches, 6 feet 8 inches from sidewalk grade must be met for all wall mounted banners, flags, baskets, or other items that protrude more than 12 inches into the right of way. So
Mhm.
that's more specific to
Right,
downtown. Unless you have a house that's very close.
So question, when we get this, the sign guidebook or whatever it's called from,
Mhm.
is that an MSU extension or?
No,
That
it's a different operation.
Right.
Phoenix, Michigan. is
Yeah,
who-
So I'm just wondering how well you will be able to convey some of that to us or maybe.
Well, I don't know, I will read it, that'll be my reading for the weekend. And we'll see, I don't know if it's something where we'll be able to download it, so whatever chapter we're dealing with, then that would be provided. For everybody's reading. I'll have to see how it's set up. And I'd have to see what the rights are. Cause it was $50 for a PDF. So I don't know if that you could only. Print it X amount of time. I have no idea what the rules are.
Yeah.
So. Well, I would say that we're not gonna make any decisions tonight. And that I'll go back to the drawing table with Charlie. And we'll try to break it down in a way that the whole commission can discuss the issue and then. So maybe we'll probably still use this for a working sheet, but anyway, I'll see what inspiration I get from that sign ordinance. Rich?
I just wanted to add that. I am opposed to having signs and windows and on walls in the residential district, so I am happy with that, except that since Carolyn brought it up, maybe there could be an exception for a window sign if you had an apartment.
And the only thing just having campaigned in some of the complexes and things, they have internal rules. So I think you're gonna find that when the people sign their lease, there's gonna be rules. But maybe there's some that aren't.
Carolyn?
I didn't bring that up in the apartments, it was Albert that did, but my concern was in the RM2 district, we have a lot of single family residential dwellings. And they should, have the same right as our RM1 and RM2. But I am still in favor of on windows and walls, so.
Okay, well, these will be concepts we'll be arguing about. Yeah. So are we done with discussion here? Okay. So I move on to number 4 on the agenda, public comment. Is there anyone here? Okay, so close public comment, commissioner comments? Ted?
I just had one question. Maybe we asked it before for Lisa, John isn't here. Were there any educational offerings that the whole commission would be involved in, you think, this year?
I have not seen anything. A lot of times we'll get contacted by Emmett County or other local governments that are doing that and see if there's a collaborative effort. I know John said he would look into that as well. I have not heard of any.
Cause if
But I
it
can
might
certainly-
affect what other things they do personally, just.
I can certainly ask him if there's anything that the
Okay.
commission could do as a body.
All right. Albert?
Kind of the same with Ted or Commissioner Buckman said. When we have subcommittees, we have a lot of them. When things come up, it would be nice to have maybe just a paragraph or two. We spent a lot of time on this issue, and the three of us on this committee came to consensus of this way to do it because.
Mhm.
I was a parliamentarian for 100 people for our National Respiratory Therapy Association. And we had lots of subcommittees and the idea of doing committee business here is really hard. But I also think that we should be directing the committee. Well, here's our ideas, you work on them, and I do agree that you're back with your comment of being backwards. But I don't want to sit here and wordsmith for 5 hours either. And that's what the subcommittees can do. So
Right.
the strengths of both of them, but it'd be nice to have some little bit of a summary when these reports come back up. I'd appreciate thinking
Okay.
about that.
I guess we could provide minutes from the sign committee.
We? I don't have a mouse.
Anyway, the sign committee minutes are pretty brief, but I don't know that they would really
I have
answer.
another
those
minutes,
questions.
more just, what were some of the key topics discussed?
Right,
Like if a fork in the road, a decision, we thought we should go this way, this was our feeling.
Right.
Yeah, brief, but.
right.
Cause we can always flesh it out more here, but it's nice to have a little bit before we come to this meeting. To get you thinking,
Mhm.
oh, okay, I see what they would think.
Okay. Are there any updates, Lisa?
I do not have any.
Okay. Well, at 7:17, I adjourned this meeting. What?
Very hard to.